Good evening, everyone. My name is Gilbert, and on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Joanna Hershon in conversation with Adam Novy discussing her new book, Saint Ivo. We are so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this uncertain time. Vroman's Live will continue to host virtual events, and you can learn more about them on our website as well as our social media. Our next event is tomorrow, Friday, May 29th at 6 p.m. with Kate E. Richards presenting her book, Drinking with Chickens, Free-Range Cocktails for the Happiest Hour. For regular updates on upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter by going to vromansbookstore.com. This evening's virtual event will have a Q&A component. So to submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen right over there. If you see a question on the list that you'd like for our authors to answer, please click the like button. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Also, if you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's featured book, you can click the green Buy St. Ivo button, which is right there. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. Now, with that, I'd like to introduce our authors for this evening. Our interviewer is Adam Novy. He is the author of a novel, The Avian Gospels. His work has been published in Dossier, The Believer, The Collegist, Denver Quarterly, and American Letters and Commentary. Joanna Hershon is the author of 5 novels, Saint Ivo, Swimming, The Outside of August, The German Bride, and Dual Inheritance. Her writing has appeared in, among other places, Granta, The New York Times, One Story, The Virginia Quarterly Review, the literary anthologies Brooklyn Was Mine and Freud's Blind Spot, and was shortlisted for the 2007 O. Henry Prize Stories. She's an adjunct professor in the creative writing department at Columbia University and lives in Brooklyn with her husband and their 2 sons and daughter. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers for this evening. Hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Hi, Joanna.
Hi, Adam.
Hi. My name is Adam Novy, and I met Joanna a while ago. And I'm so grateful to be included in this event and to get to ask Joanna questions about this book. And I love Joanna's work. And, we met when we were both kind of starting out, and every time one of Joanna's books comes out, I think she just got so much better than the last book, and her skills grew, and her vision grew, and her emotional wisdom grew. And I thought that her work had sort of like reached some kind of crest in the last book, A Dual Inheritance, which is this gigantic, brawny historical book, this like big, rangy American book about men trying to reshape fate and social forces. And then this book, St. Ivo, came out, and I think it's even better and just so ferocious and in a way so generous and honest. And I'm really just excited to talk about it. And I just want to say what it was like to meet Joanna for 1 second in, I guess, 1997. We met at the Breadloaf Writing Conference in Vermont. And one of the first things I remember about her is we were in the faculty cabin where all the good liquor was, standing at this table by where the bottles were. And you knew you were in the faculty cabin because the writer Francine Prose had a bottle of good whiskey with her name on it, and you were not allowed to drink it. And Joanna and I were staring at the bottles, and she turned to me and she said, "I wish they had Campari. Don't you love Campari?" And this sort of made me think that she was very New York City and knew everything and knew how to make a cocktail. And I'm Midwestern and I mostly just drank beer. And sometimes I would drink Campari when I was drinking a little bit of everything out of someone's liquor cabinet, and then I'd fill up the bottle with water to make it look like I hadn't touched it. So I was kind of embarrassed and thought that she was more sophisticated than me, which I still think. And so I nodded and said, yes, Campari, it makes everything better, like I knew what I was talking about. And after the conference, I went home and started drinking it all the time, and I want to thank you for introducing me to Campari. It is very delicious.
No idea.
And the other thing I want to say is that I wanted to go to this restaurant in New York City called Balthazar for dinner once, and I wanted to make sure that I had like the best person to go to Balthazar with. So I got in touch with Joanna and we went, and we had these giant tiers of seafood, and it looked like there was a lot of food there, but there actually was a little less food there than I expected. It was like expensive but deceptive. And as we were walking out, she turned to me and she said, "I feel like we need French fries." And I thought, man, she's so honest. And that's the biggest thing that I admire in Joanna's work is it always finds a way of saying the thing that I had been keeping inside and didn't want anyone to know I thought. And every time I read her work, I think I have the connection to this book that I had when I would read a book when I was a kid, and the book was being honest with me about life and its disappointments and its possibilities in the way that only books could really be honest. And that feeling has always gotten deeper and more complex every time one of her books comes out. So this is just amazing to be able to do this with you, Joanna, and thank you for the book. And I know that everyone who's here has the same experience with your work. I'm going to ask the first question now. The book starts with a lunch between the hero, Sarah, who is a filmmaker in the grips of a terrible artistic crisis in which she can't make work, and her agent, Caroline. Caroline wants Sarah to work on what she calls the other script. And everything that comes up in this book is like glowing with double and triple meanings because it's so lean. So the other script, to me, right away seemed like this kind of other life that Sarah doesn't want to try to live. Sarah says of the script she can't deal with it because she hates the ending. And that's right at the beginning of the book, and already she's obsessed with endings. The implication is that she feels like her life has reached a kind of dead end, and then very soon after that, she thinks she's afraid she only has one story. And the book is sort of about how this apparent ending becomes a necessary new beginning for her. And this is a really hard thing for middle-aged people to accept. And I say that as a middle-aged person who I'm separated from my wife, and so it's a thing that I related to when I read the book. And life is so hard to build as an adult the first time you build it. So then we have to start rebuilding our lives over and over again as we get older. And that's a shock, I think, to adults of a certain age that we have to keep rebuilding. When you wrote the scene between Sarah and the agent, did you know that the theme of rebuilding your life, which Sarah is resisting in that scene, did you know that that was the theme for the entire book?
Oh, such a good question, Adam. The scene in the beginning was not as developed when I first wrote it. First of all, I should say this novel started as a short story and published in Granta. And then I ended up deciding I wasn't finished with this world. And so I rewrote it. And so as I rewrote it, the beginning became more developed. So it always started with that lunch, but I feel that as I kind of burrowed into it more, and also the scene on the train, like the whole beginning became much more developed and much more realistic. In the beginning, it was more of like she was disoriented, and we didn't get as much actual dialogue and like moment to moment kind of tracking of her internal state. So I think all those emotional moments were kind of there, but it was more of a dreamy summary. And so when I really developed it more, it became more apparent. So it was a slower process. But also my editor who acquired the book, and I wrote the book and then I sold it. So the editor who acquired the book, she was very interested in Sarah's career, and that I had not thought about this, but she said, it's very rare that a book about a woman starts about her work. And she was really interested in Sarah's relationship to her work. And so I credit my editor at FSG actually for honing in on that aspect of Sarah and her own relationship to her work, which was there in the novel, but she really brought it out and made me articulate it more. So,
what were the other ways that Sarah changed in the course of, from when she started off in the story to when you were done putting the novel together? Like, how did she, because she is a certain kind of hero who like kind of always thinks exactly the wrong thing in every scene. And that's one of the reasons why I really love her. because she's like my friend, my secret friend. I can tell everything to, and she'll understand.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen? Like, how did you come up with her?
I will say that I feel like there's so many answers to this for me because, so I think I have to talk about how I ended up writing this at all, which is that I thought I had an experience, me personally, I had an experience on the subway, much like Sarah has on the train. Huh. Yeah, and I'm not someone who takes notes in my life. I'm not someone who has lots of ideas. Basically, I joke, but it's true. I have like an idea every 3 to 5 years, and I write it all, or I write. But I don't have tons of ideas. I don't have notebooks full of ideas, and I really am not someone who is kind of outside my life observing. And so this happened to me on the subway, and immediately I knew that this was something. It was something that I needed to address and kind of look at because this happened. It wasn't dramatic. Like if I told you what happened on the subway, it wasn't that dramatic. It was how it made me feel after it happened. And I wrote it down immediately. And then for several years, I thought I was going to write a more traditional thriller, like a literary thriller. And I was taking notes upon notes and really trying to plot out, because you need to have a plot when you have a thriller, what is going to happen. And also I thought I was going to write about this whole subculture, and I did all of this research. And then I was completely stuck, like blocked, stuck, couldn't do anything. But I still thought about it. And then I got pregnant. This is all totally relevant. Then I have older twin boys, and they were 8, and I became pregnant. And I decided to set the book aside because it was making me crazy, and I didn't want to feel guilty about not writing. And so I had the baby, we moved, and then when my daughter had a daughter, and so my daughter was 5 or 6 months old, and I rejoined my writing space, and I went back to the writing space, and I forced myself to not think about plot, to not think about structure, to not think about any previous conceptions of what I thought the book should be. And I just started like free writing, and which I never do. And it was like these images came up, and I just wrote into the images, and it was really it was like a dream. It was like this kind of weird, like, I used to do this when I was in high school. I'd have a dream, and I woke up, and I'd write out the dream in a kind of half dream state. And it was kind of like that, but then weirdly, instantly became very structured and took on this structure, which I couldn't invent when I was just thinking about it. So it had a very kind of dream-like beginning. And so I think that she came out of, and the whole book came out of being, 5, 6 months away from giving birth. And I think it really is a very primal reaction as a woman to that experience, and to this kind of primal fear that I think we all have as new parents. So I do think that's kind of where she came up. But also, I think that I was looking for the thriller, I was looking for the plot, and kind of, like the beginning, middle of it, and end, and what would the engine be? And I realized that she's the suspense. It's not I didn't write a thriller, and she's the live wire. And once I kind of became more comfortable with inhabiting her, everything took off. It was like every moment of being in her mind was both uncomfortable and kind of thrilling. And so she kind of, she took off as I did. Like as I got more comfortable kind of inhabiting her mindset, it also became more fun and more daring, and taking it a step further. Whatever uncomfortable situation or dark place her mind would wander, and my mind as an author, I would just sort of force myself to go further. I hope that answers the question. You already got into my next question, which is this completely amazing detail that I'm so in love with, and I can't believe you put it in the book. Sarah can't remember how to spell the name of her best friend's baby.
I love that detail so much because it's like really normal. It's more like this is a thing that you can't remember how to spell someone's name or their kid's name. It's, you know, and like kids have unusual names and you don't know how to spell them. But it's also a sign of how checked out she is from the details of her life. And I was going to ask you how many details you pull from life, but what you mostly just said is that you imagine most of them. And that, I guess a thing I want to say, and it's partially a question, is that, you know, I'm always learning how to be a writer, but a thing that everyone is always saying, that writers are always saying to each other is, we should steal more stuff from your life. And I'm always trying to do that. And, you know, it really seems like every detail in this book was like taken from like 6 months of your life where you were just writing everything down. And yet you say you imagined most of them. Did you imagine that detail about not knowing how to spell someone's, their kid's name, or did you take that from life?
I did. I'm sure that's happened to me, but I didn't, it really, that part was just kind of what I thought would happen to her, and just like being, I'm sure that's happened to me, but I can't think of when, you know, but I identify with it, you know, and also feeling like, well, you can't possibly ask. It's too late. You should know.
Yeah.
You can't Google it. So, you know, I know an email when you can't find the name, and, you know, you get yourself into some modern tizzy. But I do take details from my life, of course. They just sort of pop up. You know, it's not literal. It's not like, oh, this is based on my friend's country house. It's not. But strange little details show up, you know, when least expected. You know, they show up, and, you know, as a memory, but then you give them to another character without even knowing it.
Mm-hmm. I hope, by the way, that you're looking at the comments, because everyone just loves the hell out of this book the same way I do. Can you see them?
I can, but then I get very overwhelmed, and I can't.
Everyone really loves it. I just want that to be known. The author must know that everyone loves the book. This for me is like one of the biggest things about the book. Sarah's young adult daughter, Leda, is estranged from her, which is incredibly painful. And Sarah is also more or less unable to make art. And the vanishing of the daughter and of the art seem like parallels. There are parallels in the book. And it's really hard for Sarah to accept either one of them. But the reader sort of knows that she has to accept them if she wants to move on. And so she has to reinvent herself in middle age after making films and raising a child. Did you conceive of these as parallels when you were reading the book, or did it sort of come as a surprise to you that they were?
I think that it initially, like everything that I write, was not an idea. It was just what I would feel. So I think that, you know, I remember having this conversation with basically a stranger, someone I didn't know well, and she was actually a parent of a child I didn't know. You know, we were in a park and we were talking, and she told me she had been a writer, and basically she said that she'd lost her husband you know, like before this young child. She'd lost her husband, and she'd gone through this obviously horrific situation, and that she couldn't write or read fiction anymore. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to other people who are grieving, and they also can't read fiction. And there's something about that, even though I have not experienced that, that has really struck me, and it makes this kind of profound sense to me, even though it's not happening. And I think it haunts me, just that idea of not being able to escape into fiction, into a made-up reality, because actual reality is just too daunting and upsetting. And so I think that just became her guiding reality. And then the more I examined that and thought about it, then I did think about it as a parallel, but it more was like an instinct of, if something, you know, horrendous, God willing, not happening to me, but happened to me, that makes sense to me. You know, I feel like I probably couldn't write fiction.
I'm kind of one of those people I'm one of those people who struggles to read fiction now, and I still read some fiction, but it's not like I used to. And maybe I think part of it is like I read nonfiction more, and I don't know why it is, but I related to that in the book because it's like the way the world prevails on me changed, and it changed what I could read. And I feel that in Sarah, that like the world, like she's not the person that she was when she was becoming an artist. She's been an artist and a parent and a wife and an adult for a really long time, and her brain changed, and she still has, other expectations. Okay, I told you before that I was going to ask a silly question, and here it is. So get silent. I've lived in California since 2008, and I'm interested in tarot cards. Please accept my apology for this question. In the tarot card deck, death actually means freedom. And the fool, because he has no preconceptions and doesn't really know anything, has the space to have new experiences and gain wisdom. And in fact, the tarot deck is a narrative about a character named the Fool, gaining wisdom through experience in the different parts of the world. This is what I think of when I think of the mugging scene early in the book, which, like so many negative things that happen to Sarah, ends up somehow having a positive effect. Like the mugging and the loss of the cell phone are like it's like an introduction to the adventure that she's about to have. And in order to have that adventure, she has to lose something that is fundamental to her identity. And that thing is her cell phone. And also this layer of dishonesty she's had with her husband. Like she can sort of be honestly upset with her husband in a new, different way. It's like the integrity of like, if you feel like you can't be honest with someone, you start a fight with them, and then everything comes out. It's like a time-honored way of getting to the honest point and fixing everything. I really would love to know the process of that scene and the idea of losing your cell phone. And New York seems really safe to me. Do you feel like it's dangerous? Like, what do you have to, it's such an amazing, haunting scene. What do you have to say about this?
Okay, first I'm distracted because have you heard me say that, and did I say it tonight, or have you heard me say in other interviews or anything that my experience of writing the book was like tarot?
No, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea.
Absolutely. Like every single time someone asked me about the process of writing the book, and I have to say I don't know anything about tarot cards, but I've just had my cards read a couple of times, and I love it. And I love the notion of it, and I love the imagistic quality. And
they're so
sort of like totally uninformed interest. Let's say I feel that way about Jungian psychology, of which I don't really understand, but I'm drawn to it. So that's how I describe. And I think I didn't say it tonight because I feel like I've said it so much, and it feels I don't know. But I feel like when I first went in that writer space again and started writing, it felt like a tarot, like a card would show up, and I would just not ask the question, and I would just force myself to write into the image. So that's weird, but also makes sense because that's how I think the book really took shape. Okay, so the mugging scene, I agree. It's very much, I think all of it, also the book has this kind of fairy tale quality, like there's like the forest and the lake and this kind of darkness that is, both alluded to about addiction and then also like about desire and how we interact with desire, but also just very kind of, the images are very kind of fairy tale like like the mouth of the park, that's like the entrance to the park is like a mouth, and the darkness, and so I'm definitely conscious of that. And I think that the mugging scene, I thought recently, I cannot remember why I chose to do it. remember, and it's kind of bothering me because I can't remember at what point I decided to put that in and to make it such a focal point. But it is, but that actually that situation didn't happen to me, but I was mugged in a similar manner about almost 20 years ago, but 15 years ago. So I did draw from experience in that situation, but in that case, I was the person who was very passive and smart, I think, but also it told me a lot about myself, none of which was surprising, that I just kind of gave her my things, walked away. I was very calm and just very passive. And I was with someone, actually a friend, and she really fought back in this way that was, both impressive and kind of crazy, but very impressive, in a different way than Sarah does. But it was this really interesting moment that's always stuck with me. So I don't know, it just was like it was in me, waiting to be written, and then I really kind of went in there.
I think one thing about tarot cards that interests me is that it's really hard to stop analyzing what things mean. And every time I watch an episode of something on television, I can go on the internet and read what it means. And I kind of miss not knowing what anything meant, and it's like a battle I'm fighting, and I kind of look for TV shows that no one writes about online, so I don't have to know what they mean, be like my own private thing. And tarot cards. Say again.
That's also why I love. Well, that's why I love fiction, and that's also why, to me, the notion that you can't read, I couldn't relate to fiction or relate to kind of. For me, it's sort of like not being able to engage with that part of myself, which is actually a huge part of myself, which is I'm not always analyzing. I'm very open to mystery, and then kind of understanding it on this intuitive plane, and giving it a lot of thought, but having a kind of instant reckoning and understanding is something that, and recognition, like I recognize myself in images and in repeated images, I guess is the way that I can best describe it. And I think it would just be incredibly sad for me if I lost that. So it's that, I think what draws me too. Like it's that kind of not being able to just look it up, not being able to just get an instant read on what something means.
Yeah. I want to talk about Sarah's ex-BFF Kiki for a little while. I love her. Sarah friend dumped her for a dozen different reasons, but I think a lot of them boil down to the fact that Kiki's kind of this like natural born hippie who's in tune with the flow of the universe and still seems to have a good time and love things and possibly still has sex. And Sarah fights everything. She's like fighting the energy of life in a way. And one of the things I really loved about this book and in general about your work is the way you write about jealousy, which is this all-important, all-governing emotion. And jealousy is a really hard thing to write about and to think about. And I was a little nervous writing this question, in fact, about jealousy. And I want to ask why it is that do you think that you're able to be like one of the definitive American writers on jealousy? Like, what the hell's going, like, why can you, what do you know that,
Can I quote you on that? The definitive American writer on jealousy.
I'm jealous if you're writing about jealousy. I just want that to be known.
What's that?
I'm jealous of your writing on jealousy. Yeah, I'm jealous of your writing on,
Gosh, I'm very, very moved by their relationship. So I feel like that is what I feel. I feel this tremendous love between them, and I feel like Sarah does her because Kiki sees her and understands her and offers herself to her as really a true friend, and Sarah cannot handle it, and that's she can't be seen, and it's just a shame. And so I feel like their relationship moves me so much. So, but it's like they're jealous of each other in these different ways, but they're both wrong. You know, it's just based on their own fear of being known. So I think for me, I feel like I'm really writing about intimacy and friendship. But yes, definitely jealousy, and definitely. But I think a lot of that jealousy is because they're not. It's Sarah's fault that they're not. They're not communicating. They don't actually know what's going on in the other one's life. So how could they not be jealous? Because it's this kind of projection. You know, and that's, I think, when jealousy really happens is when you're just projecting on what that person has that, but you know, you're not seeing the other side of what, you know, what's going on with them. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think that jealousy is huge. It's a big force in our lives. I actually had another interviewer ask me about jealousy with writers, and you know, how has the relationship, how's my relationship as a writer changed to envy and jealousy? Just an interesting question. What's interesting is actually what I really thought was my relationship has changed just in the sense of more and more and more a lot of the people that I respect the most have not even published. So there's such amazing writers, and you know, there are many reasons for that. It's not like, oh, no one has recognized their genius and they're constantly putting themselves out there. That's not the case. But how my relationship to work is just more and more like I'm just it's always so elusive and mysterious, and I feel like, you know, you could write one book and then I'll be jealous of that book even if you never write another book. You know, it's not about the career as much as the actual mystery of how it happens or doesn't happen.
You know, before St. Ivo, you wrote long, what I called brawny and possibly muscular, and now I'll call big-boned American historical super novel called Joanna Hershon. This book is so much shorter than that book. It uses so many of the same skills, maybe to slightly different purposes. But I feel like that was the book that when I read it, I thought, all right, here's a person whose skills and vision are perfectly in balance now, and she can basically write anything that she can imagine. And sometimes you see a writer whose skills are better than their imagination, or a writer whose imagination is better than their ability to sort of illustrate what they're thinking, and their skills they're sort of out of balance in that way. And that book is like this gigantic force. And this book is also really strong, but it's smaller and leaner. What do you think you learned from the process of writing that book that you put to use in this book? They seem like in some ways really different, but you know, in other ways, I could always feel that book in this one, and it might be just because I'm sort of obsessed with that book. But how was that book present in this one, and how wasn't it?
Oh, such a great question, and I don't know that I don't know. I think that I feel all of my books kind of intertwined in some ways, and then not at all. Like I don't think I was thinking about that book at all when I wrote this book. But then I can recognize, saying that, some similarities for sure. That book is about friendship, really. More, I mean, it's about friendship between men. Yeah. This is definitely about, among other things, friendship, and that kind of jealousy and unspoken, unspoken jealousy and not knowing one another and misunderstandings. And So I don't know. I feel like A Dual Inheritance, every chapter, it's a big book and it's a saga and there's different points of view and a huge cast of characters and goes all over the world. And yes, this is just incredibly, it takes place over 3 days. It's very slim. The lens has really narrowed, but A Dual Inheritance, I feel every chapter was its own book in a way. Like every chapter did have this kind of arc, and for me it felt very cinematic, and so does this book. But so almost, even though it's a bigger book, I actually feel like it was very intimate if you just go chapter by chapter.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
So it didn't feel all that, I don't think it ever feels all that different for me, because that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in flawed characters, complex characters. I'm getting to know my characters extremely well. So I feel like every book is a process of me learning how to embody the characters. And it just has a different framework each time.
I'm teaching a summer school class. It's a fiction workshop. So, one of the things I'm doing is assigning stories to my students and telling them what the parts are that I hope that they can emulate. And I want to share with everyone the sentence that I want my students to emulate in this book. It's on page 110, and it's in parentheses. And the line is, Sarah's overwhelming urge upon arriving at any body of water was to fall asleep in the car. And so many things that are great about that line. One thing is totally been there. Another thing is, there's something about how much of a pain in the ass it is to get to the water. And then when you get to the water, you don't want to get out of the car. You just want to sleep in the car. But then Sarah's a person who is now incapable of sort of living her life. And so the book has it's like the entire book in one sentence in parentheses, right? And there's all this thematic focus in that one sentence that just comes from you being honest. And I just wanted you and all the people out there on the internet to know that that's the passage I'm teaching.
I love it.
Yeah, it's so good. Oh my! Speaking of jealousy, that line. All right. Someone said something in the chat about how this is the perfect book for the quarantine. And I have a question that's similar to that. It's a quarantine question, which is that on page 91, there's a line about how people should trade partners every 7 years. And married people who are sometimes miserable in quarantine are going to read that sentence and they're going to look back on their lives and regret certain opportunities they passed up, on certain decisions they made. And those people, when they read your book, they're going to love the book and admire it and fear it. Like it's a kind of, I think of the book as like a kind of mountain lion that jumped into my little backyard and then looked at me and saw me and then jumped out. And I know that's a very California example. Are you hearing from readers of the book what they think of it, and what's it been like for you since the book came out in this weird time that both sucks for writers, but actually may make this book somehow like a perfect experience for people to learn the truth about themselves?
Well, so as I was saying, I'm kind of an intuitive person, writer, and I, for better or for worse, don't go into a novel kind of thinking I want to write about these issues, this theme, and then kind of figure out how to illustrate that. That's not the way I work. So usually I write the book with some mastery over what I'm trying to do, or some over my own understanding. But really, it's not until the publication process do I really understand or begin to understand what I've done, what the book is about, and that's what everyone says, what's your book about? And then you have to figure out what it's about. And it's really not until that process that I kind of figure out what it's about, to be honest. So my book was published April 14th. So in my head, March 13th was when I think New York City, where I live, closed down. And, everything became very, very real and apparent. And, going on lockdown and everything. And so, and it was kind of like letting go of things one after the other. This event being kind of I was like, well, maybe I'll be able to go to LA, right? No, like, but what was interesting though is that when it was all happening, and I was kind of leading up to the book being published, I had no trouble connecting with the book. I thought, when something happens on such a greater scale than one's book, it can really feel so relevant at what you're doing. But I actually really felt like very connected to the book. And it really dawned on me what the book was about, like in a kind of lightning flash, was I feel like the book is about learning to live with profound uncertainty. And that, I think, is this theme for all of us right now in various ways, or different ways. But I do feel like that is really striking to me. And I think that people have been writing these amazing emails and texts and, just on my website. I've gotten a really strong response from it. And that's what's been the most wonderful and kind of profound for me, really. Feeling so isolated as everyone is. And then getting these kind of small bursts of real connection and feeling like really moved by that, especially because this is the time, even if you're someone who has all the time in the world, you're choosing what to do in that time as always. And it's always amazing to me when anyone reads my work and has a reaction and actually thinks to share it. So it's been particularly moving, I think, at this time, because that's the lack of everything else going on.
Yeah.
Daily.
So at one point, the couples go to a lake, and Sarah wanders off by herself, and in what I think is the scariest scene that I've ever read by you, has an encounter with a crazy guy who radiates allure, sexual violence, wisdom, freedom, and death all at once. Even though I don't think you use a single one of those words, but all of those things are in the scene. It's real amazing.
Love it.
It's like Flannery O'Connor or something, Later on, this terrifying man echoes back into the book. And when I teach this book, I'm going to say it's like the return of the repressed, because I'm going to want to impress my students. And I asked you if you wanted to read from that passage. And I know that it's a long passage and it's hard to get the whole thing in there, but it is so magical. It's like the energetic, it's like this own energy source in the book that you can only really have if the book is like a perfect dream. You could never like plan to have like a separate energy source like this in the book. It's just like pure trust in the creative process. Can you read a couple pages from that?
I will. I'll read a couple pages.
Awesome.
I will say that I did record the audiobook for this book. So if anyone's interested in audiobooks, you can hear the whole scene read by me. And okay, I'm just gonna I'm only gonna read just a teeny bit because we don't have enough time for me to read the whole scene. So hopefully some of that, death, whatever you said, wisdom, all of it will come across. Okay. All right. What do I need to say about this? Okay, I do want to say that Sarah and her husband Matthew are visiting their friends with whom they've been estranged, and Kiki and Armand, they're all in their mid-40s. Sarah and Matthew are a little older. Kiki and Armand have just had a baby, so they're older parents, and they're staying at the house. Sarah doesn't have a baby. And they're in the woods. They're in the woods. They've gone. They're trying to find a place to go swimming because it's really hot. And Sarah's alone. Can a man take a fucking piss? Of course, she said, startled now, even scared. I'm sorry. He bent down to pick up a blanket. The way he moved reminded her of people in ski boots, motion stunted but also filled with intent. He might have been a former athlete. He looked rougher than that, but she could picture it. He shook out one of the cruddy blankets. It's okay, he said in a surprisingly conversational tone. I'm just kidding. Really, just kidding. I didn't mean to scare you. I wasn't scared. Yeah, you were. You were. He gave a crooked smile. Hey, you did invade my campsite. It's right here on the path. You might want to consider pitching your tent somewhere more private next time. He interlaced his hands and stretched them out in front of him. Ever been here before? She shook her head. It's beautiful. He shrugged, looking her over. It's all right. She didn't want to catch him in the act of looking, so she remained focused on the water. You get in some kind of accident recently? She instinctively covered her face with her hand. You fought with someone? You got into it? Right. She sort of laughed. He didn't laugh at all. Someone hurt you? Someone hurt you. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry to hear it. Oh, well, thanks. He nodded, put his hands in his pockets. She hurried to fill the ensuing silence. So what else you got? About what? She laughed. Me, I guess. You have a husband, he said without hesitation. She nodded, unexpectedly excited that he was playing her game. You have a baby. She felt herself nodding. Wait, how did you guess that? Boy or girl? Girl, 8 months. You sure bounced back. A bird made a sudden racket in the trees. She looked up at the last moment of flapping wings and disrupted leaves. A twig fell to the ground. He seemed perfectly comfortable looking straight at her and, for the moment, not saying anything more.
Yeah, it's so good. I'm mindful that a lot of people.
Yeah, more exciting.
Yeah.
After that.
So many people in the chat are saying, and I feel like I have to say this, that they were more scared of Sarah in the scene than they were of the guy in the tent. I've got 5 people saying that. And with that in mind, I want to make sure that there's time for the audience to ask questions. 6 people think it. I want to make sure there's time for the audience to ask questions. So I just have one more question before opening it up, which is there a book that you imagined you were going to write that you have not written yet?
Oh, I love that question. The easier, no. I mean, I don't have, no, I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
No, I wish I did.
There are at least 2 questions, and I've got this ask a question thing, so I'm going to press it. Here is the first question, and if there are more of you with questions out there on the internet, you should ask them. Here's the first question. I'd love to hear how you developed your style. I find your writing to be so sensual. As a reader, I hear the sounds, I smell the smells. The moments are drawn out and rich with the surroundings. Where did this come from? Have you always written this way, or did it develop over time? Is this purposeful, or is this just your nature?
Oh, thank you. I think it's my nature. I think I've even, as a little kid, I always wrote, and I think even if you go back to little kid writing, it's all kind of like sensual, all of that. It's funny, I've talked to other writers about this, like people who, not all writers wrote when they were kids, but a lot did. I did, and my writing isn't that different. Like what I wrote when I was 10 is more or less a variation on a theme, which is interesting. But yeah, I thank you for the observation. I feel like it's just the way that I am and move through the world, I guess. I do have a background in acting, and I feel like that affects my writing a lot. I always acted too from a very young age, and I was really obsessed with it. So I think all of that training and experience of kind of inventing reality and in my body has affected my writing more than anything.
The next question is related to this thing about acting. Your writing always makes me think of films. Are you inspired by films, and in what way, and what films? And then ready for a Joanna Hershon penned film with 4 exclamation points, which obviously all of us agree with.
Yay. Very much so. I love film and I am very influenced by it. And I did think of this book particularly. I think I was really influenced by, I didn't like rewatch them, but I do feel like there's a kind of cinema verite influence, and like Eric Romer, say his name, the French filmmaker, that kind of wave of films and 70s films, I feel in this book. But again, I didn't like go watch them again, but I feel like I thought about them as I was writing, and I love films that not a lot of people are making this kind of films anymore right now. Just kind of not that. I mean, a lot happens in this book. It is very, there's a lot of suspense and things happen, but it is also. I think a lot of the suspense is created by kind of just moment to moment, like sensuality and living, and what people are going to say to one another, and where's the uncomfortable pause in the conversation, and just being human in a room or outside, together. So yeah, I would love if this book was made into a film.
My last question, which is a different last question, but I could just keep asking questions for another hour. Early in the book, Sarah and her husband have a discussion about what her next film is going to be. And he suggests that she write about their daughter who ran away and about the marriage. And she doesn't want to do that. And there's a suggestion at the end of the book that her vision of the world has really changed, and that she's open to new possibilities, and that she has been reborn as an artist, and that the child might find her way back, or Sarah might find her way to a life that she finds satisfactory. What do you think Sarah's next film is about? Do you know that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just know, I really think that she's going to live, and she's going to be more than okay. And I think she'll create something, but I don't feel like, oh, and now she's going to do this. Like, I don't know what she'll really do. It's more like she has an appetite for life again.
Mm-hmm. I think
if you're an artist, yeah. I think if you have an appetite for life, you'll probably create something again.
Yeah. Do you have a new thing you're working on?
That's why I said let's hope, because I have an appetite. I have a great appetite for life, and I have no idea what I'm going to write next. And but I usually don't have any idea what I'm going to write next. So I've written 5 novels. I feel like I always feel this way. It definitely is very unsettling to feel this way, but I've done it before. So I'm trying to have faith that I will do it again, and something will occur to me.
There's 2
Do you have any ideas, though?
Oh yeah, I'll just throw you one of my ideas. There's 2 questions.
Ideas.
There's 2 questions from the audience, and I'm mindful that I want to make sure the audience gets a chance to talk. And I know I said that was the last question, but I feel like I should get the 2 questions from since there's just 2 of them, and one of them is I'm curious as to what you teach specifically. What do you teach specifically?
Well, I teach creative. I teach a fiction workshop in the MFA program at Columbia University. So I guess I teach fiction writing. I teach what I do, and I don't know if that's what you're asking, but I try to, teach everything that I feel I can offer, and I loved my class in the fall. If any of you are watching from my class in the fall. I loved my students.
Okay, this is really the last question. There's a feminist aspect to Sarah's unapologetic relationship to her own inner life. Societal and cultural programming generally frown upon women who allow themselves to be who they are, even if it doesn't contribute to the nurturing of a man, a child, or society. I understand that your characterization of Sarah developed subconsciously. I'd like to hear what you think about this.
Sorry, I missed one important word in there. There's a feminist. There was.
I'll read it again. Feminist aspect to Sarah's unapologetic relationship to her own inner self. Societal and cultural programming generally frown upon women who allow themselves to be what they are. How do you feel? Even though the book evolves subconsciously, how do you feel about that?
Well, I just feel like it's so important, man or woman, to be connected to who you are. That's if I could, if I believe in anything, I believe that, and I think that if we are not connected to who we are and what we want, and recognize our desires, and learn how to, deal with them, I think that people get into real trouble. So I believe that strongly, but I didn't write about it with a political framework consciously, but I do believe that very strongly.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything I left out? Anything I should have asked?
No, you're perfect.
Yeah, I agree that both of you are.
She's the perfect one. It's just so easy to say smart things about a book that makes you smarter when you read it. You just say what you thought when you read the book. The book does everything. Thank you so much, Joanna, and thanks to everyone who came.
Thank you so much, everyone, and especially Adam and Gilbert and Vroman.
Oh, thank you. We so appreciate it. Please, that book right there that they're holding in their hands, go to that buy button down there at the bottom. Yeah. You can purchase your own copy. Purchase more than one. You can ship them to someone else and send a gift. That would be a nice thing right now, wouldn't it? I mean, this was a great conversation, and clearly everybody here in the comments is very much agreeing with that, and so thank you to you both. This is what we love to do. I know it's a little bit different than how Vroman's has done in the past, and we adjust to the times, but it's still the kind of conversation that we like to foster, and it was so great to hear. Thank you to you both. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. Thank you for supporting independent bookstores. We need you right now more than ever. So please make sure to support whatever independent bookstore is near you, and do everything you can so that we can continue these kind of great things. Please, you can follow us here on Crowdcast so you get notified for all the other virtual events that we do, and as well as our social media, and you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website. So once again, thank you to you both. Thank you to everyone from Vroman's, from just the bottom of our hearts. So we hope to see you in store in the future when it's all safer.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a good night.